Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Indicates that she will.
Thank you, Representative. I first want to start with, if you will go to, well, I don't have a page for this. You spoke briefly about the revolving door provisions. Would it be possible under your bill for a member of the General Assembly to resign beginning of January? Let's say the new General Assembly starts January 6th. If they retire on January 4th, could they lobby on January 6th?
If the member, I think what you're suggesting, if the member completes their term, completes the General Assembly, and so if they completed that General Assembly, then yes, they would be allowed to register as a lobbyist the next day. But for anyone prior to that, the 6 months would apply.
But in the nature of our schedule, right, you could be done today, May 31st. 6 months from now is the beginning of January to begin with. So you could lobby your colleagues the next day, either one way, or you could go, say, retire today, and you could still lobby January 1st. Is that correct?
If you retired today, then you would be prohibited from lobbying for 6 months from today.
Well, I guess I should clarify. That actually doesn't take place until 2023. So
when I say today, I mean this time.
When it's effective, right. I think this is really a weak excuse for a revolving door. I'd like to move to the Legislative Inspector General portions, starting on page 63, just to expedite it for you. On page 63, I see that to receive and investigate without advance approval of the LEC, which we are changing, so there would not have to be pre-approval of the LEC. I'm reading this to say that the Legislative Inspector General may not initiate an investigation unless there is a complaint filed, which is different than the current jurisdiction of the LIG. Is that your intention in this bill?
So, Rep. Bourne, are you suggesting that currently the Legislative Inspector General can initiate a complaint on her own without any complaint?
No, I'm suggesting that the Legislative Inspector General could come to the LEC with public knowledge of potential wrongdoing and request an investigation, and under this legislation, she would not be able to.
I don't know that that's a correct interpretation of the current law. Right now, she has.
It's my understanding that if there's public knowledge, public reporting of something, the Legislative Inspector General currently could come to the Legislative Ethics Commission and request to investigate without someone initiating a complaint.
I don't know that that's correct, Rep. Bourne. I'm looking at the current language, which allows the Legislative Inspector General under subsection 1 currently to receive and investigate allegations of violations of this act, et cetera. So to receive and investigate, to me, implies that she receives a complaint of some sort. I don't see that she has the authority to initiate something on her own.
So it's my understanding that she does, and if she currently does, if we were able to get clarification on this, would you be intending to change that with this statute?
Well, I don't think she does. So I don't understand how you are making that interpretation. So
Have you spoken to the Legislative Inspector General on this change?
No, we have not, but it is something that she has advocated for many, many times over the past 2 years. So, we could talk, if it turns out that you are correct, we could certainly talk about some clarifying language, but at this moment, I don't think your interpretation is correct.
So I've spoken with the Legislative Inspector General, and that's her interpretation, that this would limit her ability. I'd also like to move to page 58. And it's your interpretation in your presentation of the bill that this clarifies, I think was your word, the intention of the law when it was passed. It's my interpretation that you are limiting the jurisdiction of the Legislative Inspector General. Do you have anything from the passage of this initial legislation to show that this was, in fact, the intent when it was passed?
Sure. Yeah, sorry to delay that, Representative. There were, in the hearings that we had, there were differing interpretations, even amongst the three inspector generals that we have had, as to what they thought their jurisdiction was. And so I do believe that this does clarify what the jurisdiction is, and it's also consistent with what the jurisdiction, the scope of the jurisdiction of the Executive Inspector General.
I appreciate that. I think that it narrows it. So under this, would a legislative inspector general be able to investigate a case like we saw with former member Arroyo?
Yes, but I guess what I'd ask you is, are you saying that you support the jurisdiction that at least one of the inspector generals had discussed, that it's 24/7, your personal life as well as your professional and campaign life? Is that what you're suggesting should be the standard?
Yes, I believe that the checks and balances we have in place with both the discretion of the Legislative Inspector General as well as with the check and balance on the back end with the Legislative Ethics Commission would rein in a Legislative Inspector General from going beyond their bounds, particularly since now we haven't changed the voting threshold to a supermajority to block a published report. I think there are well over enough checks and balances to make sure that a Legislative Inspector General would not go beyond their bounds.
Well, I would suggest that we've just removed one of the checks and balances by allowing the Inspector General to initiate an investigation based on complaints without the authorization, or I'm sorry, not authorization, without the approval of the Legislative Ethics Commission. So I think this is a good balance, and one that I think balances her duties with the public's I don't know, with the public's confidence that she's able to look out for anything related to our public and official duties.
I appreciate that, but we've seen members of this body who have clearly acted outside of what the public's trust would entrust them to do to the bill, Mr. Speaker, that have clearly acted outside of that in instances that are maybe illegal, maybe not. Maybe a state's attorney wouldn't be able to do anything about it, but it clearly goes beyond what we would expect a lawmaker, who I do believe is set to a higher standard. I'm really disappointed with this piece of legislation. It's not in alignment with what former Legislative Inspector Homer, former Legislative Inspector Porter, or the current Legislative Inspector General have asked for. We have seen time after time after time members of this body, elected officials in Illinois, who have gone against the public's trust and who are, in some cases, have gone to trial for it. If we are going to show the public that they can have a renewed sense of trust in state government, we've got to do something a whole heck of a lot better than this watered down, diluted, and I think in some instances, really deceptive ethics reform. We are looking at actually taking away some of the jurisdiction of the legislative inspector general. This bill literally does not ban some members of this body from being lobbyists. This bill claims to have a 6-month revolving door, but you and I both know you could resign a day early and then go lobby your colleagues 2 days later. If we are going to have real anti-corruption safeguards in place in this body, we've got to do a heck of a lot better than this, and that starts with really empowering the legislative inspector general so there's not a protectionist racket called the LEC or LIG to make it look like we're policing ourselves. I'm going to vote for this because we've got some tiny pieces of very small steps in the right direction, but the public in this body should demand much better than this. I move for unlimited debate.
Representative